Hide and seek. I was curious about this strange mother and daughter family, but at that time the adults thought that children were very talkative. Even if they told these stories to their grandmother or mother, at most they would just lightly slap my butt, then jokingly admonish me, then go back to their own business. 5 or 6-year-old children have question marks in their heads and are curious about everything, so I paid attention to Tung Nguyen. When I was young and lived in my grandmother's house, the heat was unbearable, so I had to go to my grandmother's place to avoid the sun. According to today's terms, that place was a slum. From east to west, there were narrow alleys that could only accommodate 3 people at most. Each alley had more than a dozen families. The entire area was low-rise. Of course, my grandmother had 6 daughters, so on the top floor, an even narrower space was cut out as a room. I still remember that my youngest son would stay upstairs during his graduation exams. It was damp and stuffy, and smelled of mold. Even though it was late autumn, staying there for a while would make me sweat profusely. Most of the houses were self-built. Although they were old and dilapidated, they were quite sturdy, but most of them didn't have enough light. Even during the day, you couldn't see your fingers inside. However, for the people here, they were still better than thatched houses. Every alley from beginning to end always has 1 or 2 connecting points, like a big net, just like a field covering the ditch. The children of each family, regardless of their size, are all raised in a free-range manner, playing marbles in the spring, throwing cards in the summer, playing tops in the fall, throwing snowballs in the winter. The children's minds are only thinking about how to change the way they play. At that time you can almost at will see the little devils with sweaty heads covered in mud running around crazily. Sometimes they will bump into adults who are busy working. The parents occasionally scold them and then don't have time to take care of them anymore. Of course, the most suitable and easiest type of terrain to play is hide and seek, and when it comes to hide and seek, I immediately think of Tung Nguyen. Round heart. Xiao Yuan's entire family was not from this area. He and his mother, a thin and pale woman, moved next door to his grandmother's house. It turned out that the family there wanted to move to another area, so they rented the house to the mother and son. Xiao Yuan's mother was an extremely eccentric person. Regardless of spring, autumn, winter, or summer, she would always wear a small floral shirt and very thin brown trousers. Every day, she would hold a handful of rice in her hand and call the hens she raised, which were even skinnier than her, like sticks. She didn't like to chat with the neighbors, but she often had to rely on weaving some bamboo products to sell to make money to support herself and her son, such as some brooms, rice buckets, hats, etc. Her face always showed an indescribable pain, like a patient with an illness that was difficult to describe, or like a child waiting to be scolded. Her face was as yellow as rice and her slightly dry blue lips also made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Every time she saw her son return, her eyes could not hide her disgust and fear, but it was completely opposite to her caring actions. Xiao Yuan's mother's voice was always very low, like a veil covering her, or echoing from underground. In the hot weather, it sounded like the screeching of a cicada about to die. Although this woman did not like to join in the hustle and bustle, one could often hear her and her son talking, but most of the time it was her talking and her son could not be heard answering, but occasionally one could hear a few sentences, because Xiao Yuan spent most of the day playing outside. Only at night would the mother and son talk together. There were a few times when I woke up to pee, heard some movement inside, so I leaned under their window to eavesdrop. But the content of the conversation was very strange, even confusing to me. "You let me go. What else do you want? How long do you want to stay with me? Why don't you leave yet?" For example, Tung Nguyen's answer was the same sentence over and over again. "Are not." I was curious about this strange mother and daughter family, but at that time the adults thought that children were very talkative. Even if they told these stories to their grandmother or mother, at most they would just lightly slap my butt, then jokingly admonish me, then go back to their own business. 5 or 6-year-old children have question marks in their heads and are curious about everything, so I paid attention to Tung Nguyen. The place where my grandmother lived was originally a dense forest. More than 100 years ago, at the end of the Qing dynasty, a few fishermen came ashore and chose this place to live. They also called this generation the Fong family school. As for why it was called that, no one could clearly explain the reason. It was just a matter of following the footsteps of the previous generations. In this area, children from 5 to 8 or 9 years old can grab a big bundle at a time, so playing is naturally indispensable. Since everyone's family background is similar, they are not rich, and children from poor families seem to naturally like to help each other, so in less than a few days, Xiao Yuan has gotten used to getting along with everyone. It's just that he's a bit weird. Xiao Yuan's head was very large, and his features were strange, almost flat without any undulations. From afar, it looked like a red balloon that had been blown up and then delicately painted over. On the large and round skull, there were a few strands of wet hair. Under the thin and white scalp that looked like cloth that had been washed with bleach many times, purple blood vessels the size of straws could be clearly seen. His eyes were very small, and his sparse eyelashes made people almost feel like his eyes were like 2 beans stuffed into a handful of flour. But he liked to squint when talking. His nose was not high, wide, and short, and was slightly sunken at the bottom. His thick lips were slightly raised, always looking like he was swallowing a bitter pill. Although Xiao Yuan's mother herself did not eat rice, she still had to make sure that her son had meat and fish every day. She was really too poor. She went to the nearby lake with her bare hands to catch a few toads to cook for Xiao Yuan to eat, even though her hands were injured by the venom excreted by the toad's skin. So we kids were extremely jealous of him. Moreover, he didn't like to talk much, but every time he spoke, he was like an adult, always teaching us kids his age, and everyone was especially convinced by his words. Xiao Yuan's exposed skin was always swollen and semi-transparent, like pig skin torn thinly. His hands were always wet. Every time I held his hand, it felt smooth, like holding a bar of soap. Almost every time we played hide and seek, he could always find us, no matter where we hid, under a tricycle, in a bamboo basket, in a small dark room, or up a big tree. Every time we thought we had hidden away, we were discovered not long after. Moreover, every time like that, Tian Guin would appear behind you, heavily pat your shoulder, then coldly laugh and say, "I saw you." According to the rules, the one who is caught should hide, but Xiao Yuan didn't seem to like hiding, and everyone was happy to let him catch them. However, this kind of game, once the balance is lost, the number of times he gets caught will no longer be interesting. When Xiao Yuan enthusiastically invited everyone to play again, he was met with disdainful glances from everyone. The children immediately dispersed, leaving only me alone. As for him, he once again squinted his eyes at the backs, walking away without saying anything. "Why do you always find us?" He and I happened to be on the same way, so of course we asked him. "You guys are so stupid, I've escaped from those places countless times before." His reply was still extremely rude, but I was used to it. "So, is there any way to make it so that whoever wants to capture you will never be able to find you?" Before arriving home, Tian Guin was about to push open the wooden door to go inside. I asked him again. This time, Tian Guin did not answer immediately, but pulled back the hand that pushed the wooden door. He smiled and walked in front of me, stretched out his 2 hands, and placed his thumbs lightly on my eyes. "Blind its eyes, just like that, press down hard with your thumb, it won't be able to find you anymore." His words were like a drill, and he really started to exert force with his hand. My eyes quickly felt a sense of pressure. I was over 5 years old and naturally cried loudly. Xiao Yuan seemed to realize that something was wrong. He immediately withdrew his hand and went into the house, leaving me alone to carefully rub my painful eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep until very late. I could no longer hear my grandmother and mother talking in their sleep like folk songs to lull me to sleep. I could only hear Tian Wen's words constantly lingering in my ears. "Blind it. What a freak." I turned over, suddenly feeling that tonight was a bit hot. The night wind should have been very cool, but now the wind was extremely weak. Suddenly my lower body tensed up. I had a slight urge to pee. I got up from the bamboo bed, rubbed my still slightly sore eyes and pee. As I said before, the alleys of the Fong family school were very narrow. In the summer, the houses were like steamers. Everyone spread out their beds and bamboo mats outside to avoid the heat. The grandmother's house was at the end of the alley. But here, each house did not have a toilet. Adults had to walk more than 100 meters to the public toilet. As for the children, they all had to temporarily deal with it by the sewers next door. I got out of bed and found the moon had risen. Because there were so many things, I carefully avoided the pile of clutter and suddenly found my neighbor sleeping outside. I didn't pay much attention before, maybe my eyes hurt a little that day, so I looked a little unnaturally. From where I stood, stretching straight down, outside the doors of every house, there were several people lying there, all motionless, like goods piled up, with no discernible boundaries. The silver moonlight passed through the cracks of the old, dilapidated plastic tent and shone on their bare muscles, reflecting a strange light. I saw a plastic mannequin factory nearby, a place that specialized in making models for clothing stores. That day, when they were unloading goods, the wind happened to be strong. Stacks of naked mannequins lay on the open ground, just like now. The young me was a bit surprised, almost unable to distinguish whether the things lying on the ground were real people or not. But when I finished peeing, I noticed that only Xiao Yuan's family didn't sleep outside. Moreover, ever since they moved in, no matter how hot the weather was, they had never slept outside. They always finished dinner and went inside to close the door early. I was about to go over and take a look, but the door suddenly creaked open. A figure bent his waist and squeezed through the crack in the door, then stood up straight and closed the door again. I quickly squatted down next to a bamboo building, took a closer look, and it turned out to be Qinwen's mother. Her side face was turned towards me, exuding an uncontrollable sense of excitement and release, like a prisoner who had just been released from prison, and also like a gambler who was concerned about the outcome. In her hand she carried a small cloth bag. When she and Xiao Yuan moved in, she also carried this. The woman seemed to be uneasy and looked inside for a bit, then carefully walked past the person lying in the alley, but it wasn't an easy task either. She seemed to hesitate a bit, naturally choosing to go out from the alley on my side. Then she passed by where I was hiding, disappearing into the darkness. Fortunately, perhaps she was in a hurry to leave, and didn't pay any attention to me. But while I was wondering why she would leave so carefully at night, the closed wooden door opened again. Xiao Yuan walked out from inside. His eyes were not as small as they were during the day, but instead, they were shining, like a cat's eyes. "You can't go, I like to play hide and seek the most." Xiao Yuan's voice was very low, but it sounded like the voice of a grown man, just like him and my grandfather. Right after that, he sneaked into the house. I was a little scared. The previous feeling of heat was gone. I rubbed the goosebumps on my arms, and crawled into bed to sleep. On the second morning, I was woken up by my family and was about to wash my face and get ready for breakfast when I found Xiao Yuan's mother holding a bowl of noodles with fried egg on it and giving it to Xiao Yuan sitting on the bench. Xiao Yuan's expression was very pleased. He took the bowl of noodles. However, I saw that the noodles were clearly steaming hot, but Xiao Yuan was not afraid of the heat as he ate each mouthful, and almost didn't bother to swallow. In the blink of an eye, the noodles were down his stomach, and the bowl was empty. But Xiao Yuan's mother didn't seem surprised. She just resentfully took the empty bowl, bit her lips, and after Xiao Yuan finished eating, he quickly ran out. Before leaving he told me to eat quickly and go play with him. What happened last night felt so unreal to me. Maybe I was dreaming. It never happened at all. That's how I comforted myself at that moment. A few days passed, the summer temperature began to recede. My happy time at my grandmother's house also had to end, counting on my fingers to calculate that it was tomorrow, and when Xiao Yuan heard that I was about to leave, he only said oh, then invited everyone to play hide and seek. The kids only played with him when they had nothing else to play. Of course, the result was obvious. The whole afternoon was Xiao Yuan catching people, and not a single one was left behind. And of course I went home with Xiao Yuan amidst the grumbling of my friends. After dinner, everyone went to bed very early. In the middle of the night, the wind suddenly turned cold, like an iron knife cutting flesh. I closed my eyes and groped for the blanket for a while but couldn't find it. In the end, I felt something round like a meatball. As soon as I opened my eyes, I found Xiao Yuan squatting beside my bed, and my hand was touching his head. He was staring at me with his eyes and nostrils flaring. Of course, I was scared and cried out, but he quickly used his hand to cover my mouth. "Follow me," he said and turned around, walking out. As if possessed, I actually followed him. The bustling street during the day was now deserted and quiet. Back then, there were no night shops like bars or internet cafes. Even TVs were a luxury for a few people. During this time, there was not even a shadow of a ghost outside, except for the night watchman. The sound of my footsteps and Xiao Yuan's lingering footsteps echoed across the asphalt road, still carrying the lingering heat. He walked in front at a slow pace, not knowing how long it took, and walked out of the Fong family school, where there was also a food station and a free store. "Where the hell are you going?" I couldn't help but ask him. "Go find someone, she wants to play hide and seek with me." He didn't turn back, just kept walking. "Looking for someone?" I asked in a mumble, but this time Tiun Wen didn't answer. He just chuckled a few times in front, his plump shoulders shook twice, causing the excess flesh behind his neck to pile up. I don't know how long I walked. I was so tired that I wanted to close my eyes, but I bumped into Tiun Wen, and he stopped. "You know you can't escape." Tiun Wen suddenly spoke. I was extremely surprised, then realized he wasn't talking to me. The person he was talking to was a curled-up person hiding next to a small grocery store that had already closed. "I will follow you all my life," Tiun Wen continued. "This place is an intersection connecting the main road outside with the residential area. There is no one on the left and right sides. I have to try anyway." The man suddenly stood up, carrying a bundle of clothes in his hand. Turns out to be Tiun Wen's mother. "You have to leave tomorrow, right?" Xiao Yuan suddenly turned his head, looking at me with a smile. I nodded absent-mindedly. "Here, you are the only one who treats me the best." Xiao Yuan suddenly reached out his hand, like an elder, wanting to touch my head. "What do you want to do again?" The woman suddenly cried out in a shrill voice, like the sound of fingers scratching on a blackboard. Tiun Wen's hand stopped in midair. I don't know why, but I instinctively felt that Tiun Wen was extremely dangerous at this moment. I ran to the woman's side. The woman pushed me behind her back with her hand. "I hate this body." Tiun Wen held his head with both hands and said softly, "Why do you always play hide and seek with me? I told you can't beat me, no matter where you hide I can find you." Tiun Wen raised his arms and walked towards me. I could clearly feel the woman trembling. "Hide, hide, then I will come find you again. I told you, I like finding people to hide from me the most." Tiun Wen grinned as he walked over. "Hurry, don't let it find us." The woman reached out and pulled me to run on the deserted street. Turning around, Tiun Wen was still standing there without moving, just reaching out his hand towards us. We ran to several places, but in reality, every time before we could sit still, Tiun Wen would slowly walk out from the darkness. "I'm coming to find you again. Run away, run away." The woman heard this and shouted like she was crazy, pulling me to run again. I don't know how long we ran, but the woman and I were both exhausted. We were practically being dragged behind by her. The two of us leaned against the iron railing of the walkway, gasping for breath. "Can't run anymore?" Tiun Wen stuck out from the gap between the iron railing, smiling foolishly. "I'm not running anymore." The woman didn't know where she got the strength from. She suddenly reached out her two hands and pressed down on Tiun Wen's neck, pulling him to the ground, but Tiun Wen still smiled as before. "I only buy and sell things. I have never killed anyone. I have never killed anyone. I have tolerated you enough. You are the first." "The first person?" "No way." Tiun Wen's voice was muffled to the point of being shrill as a water valve about to shut off. "Blind its eyes, it won't be able to find me again." I don't know why, but suddenly I remembered these words, and moreover, I couldn't help but say them out loud. The woman seemed to suddenly understand something, and really reached out her thumb and pressed towards Xiao Yuan's eye socket. A stream of fresh blood spurted from her eye sockets, splattered all over the woman's body, but Xiao Yuan smiled as if she was not in pain, nor did she show any resistance. After a while, Xiao Yuan really lay motionless on the ground. The woman also used all her remaining strength to pull me and continue running forward. While running, she kept sarcastically saying things. I turned my head to look back. Tian Wen was lying there motionless. Finally, both she and I ran out of breath and fell paralyzed on the ground. The woman's voice seemed to have recovered. I just saved your life, little one. She turned her head and said proudly. Isn't Tian Wen your son? I adjusted my breathing, wondering why mother and son could be like this. He's not my son. The woman frowned, her face like an evil spirit, her fists clenched. I thought it was just a piece of merchandise, but it turned out to be like a dog skin patch that I couldn't escape from. She continued to speak resentfully, but when she turned her head and saw my clueless expression, she couldn't help but wave her hand. Why am I telling you this? You little devil don't understand. She stood up and stretched her waist. I probably won't see him again. We play hide and seek every day, you damn devil, I'll blind you and see how you can find me. After saying that, she suddenly narrowed her eyes and looked at me, like a hungry devil looking at food, causing me to continuously take 2 steps back. Come with me, I'll take you out. She reached out her hand towards me. I desperately shook my head and backed away. She angrily scolded me, ignoring me. Where are you going? I saw her turn around, suddenly bending over with great difficulty. You don't need to worry. She moved her neck a little strangely. Why does my hair feel like it's being pulled? I suddenly discovered a plump, white hand reaching out from the woman's neck, full of green veins, like the veins on dry leaves, so I raised my head to look. Another Xiao Yuan's heavy body pressed on the woman's back, smiling exaggeratedly, one hand gripping the woman's hair, one hand placed on his mouth, making a silent gesture towards me. But I felt something was wrong, because there were no wounds on Tian Wen's face, but the woman's hand was clearly still bleeding. The woman seemed to be completely unaware, and as she walked forward along the street, she turned her neck before taking a few steps. Wherever I go, I can find you. Suddenly, a whisper-like voice pierced through my ears. That voice belonged to Tian Wen. I didn't go home, but sat there until dawn, because my legs were a little weak. When I returned home in the morning, I was scolded. My grandmother and mother were scared, but luckily nothing happened to me, so of course it was over. Not long after, it was said that the police came here, holding a wanted poster looking for Tian Wen's mother, or more appropriately, that woman. Who is that person? I asked my mother. That woman was a human trafficker, specializing in trafficking children of several years old, about the size of a child. She tricked the children into gathering them together, dragging them to the countryside to sell, but one night the driver fell asleep, the car flipped into the river, all the children drowned, and they were only discovered a few days later. When they were pulled up, their heads were swollen like buns, the veins on their heads were bulging. More than a dozen children, their lips were purple, their eyes were pressed down by the swollen scalp on their foreheads, their skin was as transparent as a radish. That day, the police told everyone about the wanted notice and what had happened. Then everyone knew that woman was such a cruel person. She herself had children, and did this kind of thing that defied the will of heaven. It's a pity that they haven't caught her yet. Mother angrily explained. Tian Wen is not her son. I suddenly said. Mom was a little confused, but continued, ignore her. Anyway, the police said that before being reported, she seemed to have tricked a child, and she often carried it with her, probably wanting to adopt it as a son. She's done so many bad things, maybe she won't be able to give birth anymore. Mom scolded again. After saying that, Mother hurriedly went to do her own thing, then went to Grandma's house. That house already had someone else, but that woman was nowhere to be seen. Later on, she accidentally heard the neighbors gossiping. In another place she had seen a skinny woman carrying a big-headed son. But they still couldn't catch her. These two people were like playing hide and seek with the police. After that, I often had the same dream. In the dream, I saw a group of children playing hide and seek from afar. The children laughed and hid, only one of them turned his back to everyone and rested his head on his arm against the wall. I also happily walked towards the direction they wanted to join. The child leaning against the wall suddenly turned his head, He had no eyes, only a patch of dried blood in his eye sockets, tightly pulling his eyelids and forehead, forming several deep wrinkles like grooves. That face is Tune Wen's face. In my dream, I was so scared that I took a step back. The children who were hiding earlier suddenly came out of their hiding place and slowly walked towards me. They were all little Yuan, all had the same appearance, big, fat, swollen heads, squinted eyes, blue and purple lips, and wet bodies. "Come play hide and seek," they shouted innocently in unison. I woke up from my dream with a start, covered in sweat. I seemed to understand why that woman couldn't escape from Tune Wen no matter what.